She's here.
Hey everyone, welcome. Glad you're able to be with us. We're still waiting just a moment. Michelle should be here in just a moment. Looks like everybody's already knows the drill, letting us know where they're from. We've got some people from Ohio, California, New Jersey, Florida. Fantastic. We have a few people from over across the pond besides you, Karandeep. Maybe, hopefully you have some supporters on your side as well. Let's see here. Let me close a few things. We had a few technical difficulties.
I see a couple of people that are essentially in my backyard here in Arizona.
All right. Mm-hmm. Any names you recognize so far?
Oh, I see Rob Packard just joined. That's fun.
Right. Thank you all for your patience with me. I'm just sort of I bit off more than I could chew this morning. So we'll get started in just a moment. We're just a little bit late, so apologies for that. I wanted to ask, is this anyone's first Greenlight Guru event? I'm curious if this is your first event. If so, just give me a hand wave or a thumbs up or something like that. We got at least one honest person. All right, Lola, Alan, welcome. Glad you're able to be here with us. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's see here. One moment, just a minute. I'm sorry, I keep getting a few different issues here. Okay. Let's have the official start. Welcome everybody to today's event. Today we are going to be discussing EU MDR. So the question arose from a LinkedIn post that I put up about, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, where we were discussing just the pros and cons of EU MDR and some of the things that you have to go through in order to accomplish EU MDR. And so during that conversation, Karandeep had a particular position that I'm going to let him present in just a moment. And then Michelle, I pulled her into the conversation. So apologies to Michelle, or thank you, whichever the case may be. And we talked a little bit about the differing opinions. And so I thought it'd be an interesting opportunity to have a public discussion as to why or what the differences are and what companies can be doing to be preparing for EU MDR. I'd like to share just a few things about Greenlight Guru and why it is we put on these events. Greenlight Guru is more than just an educational platform, although that is one of our goals and one of our missions is to improve the quality of life. And so one of the ways we do that is putting on these free events, inviting experts from the field like Karandeep Singh Badwal and Michelle Lott. And so I'd like to emphasize that, but I also want to show that we also provide software to the industry. If you're interested in learning how 1,100 different customers of medical devices are invested in Greenlight Guru, feel free to reach out after the event. We can talk more about that. Today's event, though, is, as I already mentioned their names, Karandeep Singh Badwal. He's the founder of QARA Consultant, and Michelle Lott, who is the founder of Lean QARA. Glad to have you both. I'll let you mention just a few things about yourself if you don't mind, and then we can go ahead and get started. Karandeep, do you want to start?
Sure, go ahead. So Etienne, always a pleasure to come on the Greenlight Guru show. And yeah, so I'm Karandeep. I'm the founder of QARA Medical, which is basically a medical devices quality and regulatory consultancy. I'm also founder of the MedTech podcast, in which I interview different MedTech leaders in the industry, and I'm also a content creator on LinkedIn. So if you want to have bite-sized information in terms of what quality and regulatory is all about, feel free to follow me.
All right. Michelle, do you want to mention just a few things about yourself?
Sure. I'm principal and founder of Lean RAQA. We specialize in helping startups and small to mid-sized businesses right-size their quality management system and regulatory solutions. We can take a client anywhere from concept development and early regulatory strategy all the way through to submission and commercialization. And then in commercialization, we offer fractional QA services. So we're also a virtual quality staff.
Okay, awesome. So the discussion for today is around EU MDR. Now, EU MDR in the title is 2017, 745. So this has been around since 2017. It's nothing new, but it seems like it's continually renewing in a sense. And so I wonder if we could present maybe your case or your side, or what your opinion is on what MDR versus MDD. Karandeep, do you want to start and just give maybe just a 5-minute overview of your opinions and your thoughts on the change in the regulation?
As per how this conversation came to be, Etienne, I do not believe the MDR was a completely new regulation. I call it the MDD plus. It was basically the things that companies should have been doing, which has now been mandated. Now, reality of the situation is, when it came to the MDD to MDR, there wasn't a huge change. Yes, there were changes. There was just a little bit more onus on the legal manufacturers, which is, again, that's one of the changes. Now, in terms of the main changes that's happened, number one is Rule 11. Under the old MDD, the concept of software itself being a medical device was like completely alien. Something that's written in the 90s. Software was something that was embedded into maybe a screen or something like that. But the idea of being a software medical device in itself, it was completely alien. So what happened was, a lot of the software medical devices were class 1, which means they were self-certified. Now, yes, you had to have technical files, you had to have XYZ, but no one was inspecting you. I'm not here to say that class 1 medical devices allegedly were not having technical files and not doing everything by the book. But effectively, what's happened is, under Rule 11, a lot of software medical devices now come under class 2A, which means that they have to have a notified body audit. Now, I'm not saying that these companies have done anything wrong. Now, if you were never audited, how would you know that your technical files are up to scratch? You can follow the regulation by the book, but then if you're never audited, how do you know that it's up to it? And another thing as well with the EU MDR is Article 10.9, quality management systems. Effectively, under the old MDD, if you was a class 1 medical device, you did not need a full quality management system. Whereas now, under the EU MDR, you now require a full quality management system, which is pretty much ISO 13485, plus registration and reporting. So that's one thing that's changed as well. And then number 2 as well, under the MDR, there's more onus now on the notified bodies. What would have been a 2-day audit is maybe now a 3 to 4-day audit. So there's more cost involved as well. And then the other difference as well, again, especially with the software point of view as well, when it comes to MDR. Under the old MDD, a lot of these software medical devices were class 1. If now they're falling under class 2A, so they need a notified body audit. The idea of software medical device, AI, machine learning is relatively new. If you look at traditional devices, things like pacemakers, defibrillators, hospital equipment, they've been around for decades. Now, when it comes to a notified body audit, they have what's known as a technical expert or technical auditor, who's somebody who understands that particular type of product. They can go through the technical file and they understand how that product works. Now, your traditional devices, plenty of people out there, effectively, who can work with pacemakers, defibrillators, your traditional devices. But under the MDR, there's only so many people that understand software. There's only so many people that understand AI. There's only so many people understand machine learning, which causes a lot of issues and backlog. Now, when the EU MDR came along first, there was a lot of backlog in there trying to get a notified body audit date. Now, the notified bodies now have been wising up to this. They're bringing a lot more expertise in-house. But what's happened now with the EU MDR effectively is, it used to go EU first and then US, due to timelines and restrictions, etc. Now, the basketball has gone to the other side of the court, where companies are thinking, let's go US first and EU MDR afterwards. So I don't feel as though the EU MDR has killed anything. It's just EU MDR has become second choice. So Michelle, feel free to comment on that topic.
And before you do, Michelle, I forgot to mention something. So those of you who are listening, if you have questions at any point, you can use the tab up in the top right. So there's the chat and Q&A tab. So if you click on that Q&A tab, that's where you can see what other people have asked, and you can vote on those questions as well. So I'd love it if you go ahead and use that Q&A tab for any questions you have. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as well if they come to you, and maybe other people can answer those as well, and we can have some dialogue in the chat. But just wanted to make sure you're aware of that option. Okay, apologies for interrupting, Michelle. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So I want to start with discussing this whole concept of MDD plus that Karandeep threw out. And to me, it's like more like MDD plus 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 plus. And the reason why I think that is because they're, and just like he said, like things they should have been doing all along. Well, I remember when I was in industry and we were getting audited, frequently, because I was working at a contract manufacturer at that time. So it was open season almost all year for different types of inspections. And then they always had a different hot button every year, like, what about this INBOG guidance document and blah, blah. So basically what the MDR has done is taken those guidance documents, which, everybody in industry interprets as optional because it's not binding. And they basically codified it into regulation, into the MDR. But there's not a whole lot of clarity on just adding, from like say 70 some odd pages to 170 pages. You just added more words without an understanding of the expectation. And so that's the second problem I see with MDR. Should they have been doing some of these as best practices all along? Yes, but they lost my train of thought.
Yeah, it's interesting that the changes that we've seen. One of the things that I'd be curious about too. Sorry to interrupt. You got me thinking about the notified body changes, because I've heard you talk quite a bit about that in the past, Michelle. If you wanted to weigh in on some of those things.
Yeah. So I think that we have an accountability problem throughout the kind of stakeholder system in Europe, and that the notified bodies that were all qualified under MDD were being slack. Several of them had reputations of being easier than others. And then they weren't enforcing to the level that they should have been, which created, so now under MDR, we have only 48 notified bodies right now. And there's still more coming in the pipeline, but they're all fighting over the same resources internally and the same processes to get designated. Then to get people hired takes 12 to 18 months to get them up to speed. So there's a whole capacity constraint as well. So the MDR raised the bar, which raised the bar on notified bodies. And then, everything just flows downhill. And now industry is, three removed from the understanding of the expectation of how the regulation is implemented. And because you have 48 notified bodies, you have 48 different interpretations. You probably have, a half dozen or more different native languages. And so there's just that kind of whole dynamic that's causing, it's like a theory of constraints.
You mentioned the 48 notified bodies, and I'd be curious. I should have given you guys buzzers to to answer this question. But when I think about the 48 notified bodies, I think of a pro and a con. On the one hand, it sounds like, okay, well, we have a few more than we used to, so that should hopefully help with some bottlenecks. But on the con side, that could potentially lead to increased variation in the interpretation of the regulation. And I wonder if you can weigh in on whether, yes, it is going to decrease some of the bottleneck, or yes, it is going to increase some of the confusion around the interpretation. Karandeep, do you want to start?
Yeah, so effectively, and again, Michelle touched on a very good point there. When you're dealing with the US, everyone speaks English. When you're dealing with Europe, we have so many different languages, as Michelle touched on to. Like what makes sense in German may not make sense in French or English or Spanish, etc. Things can be misinterpreted, especially when it comes to the EU MDR. If you have a regulation that's translated to multiple different languages, things can be misinterpreted. Things like may or should in a different language, maybe you must do it or you have to do this. There's little things like that as well. And then number two is what Michelle touched on to as well. Some notified bodies are easier than others. It's kind of like it depends on the language that you're working in as well. That's a different point that we need to bring into there as well. And I feel as though, if you've got something that's got multiple different languages, you've got multiple different interpretations of the same regulation, which can potentially cause issues. And now the issue that I have with the EU MDR is very opinionated. EU MDR says you must do X, Y, Z. One auditor may say, okay, this is acceptable, but the other auditor may say, turn around and say to you, no, this is not acceptable, which can cause some issues. And the second point of EU MDR as well is transparency. Now, the beauty of when you work with the FDA is you can have pre-submissions, you can speak directly to the FDA. You can't do that with the EU MDR. You know, the only opinions you can get is of expert consultants like myself or Michelle, who can maybe guide you. But again, at the same time, it is the notified body auditor who is the decision maker. And that is the difference with the EU MDR as well. And then number three, what I would say as well is kind of with the EU MDR, it's a little bit like, and when it comes to the size of notified bodies, so effectively how it came to the EU MDR is, you know, we had a 60-page count when it came to the EU MDD. We now got 174 count when it comes to the EU MDR. We had 23 articles when it came to the MDD. We have now 123 in the EU MDR. We have 12 Annex 6 in the MDD. We have 17 in the EU MDR. And the biggest difference between MDD and MDR is MDD was get to market. MDR is now full product life cycle, post-market surveillance. All the differences, you know, what happens when it comes down to end of market. So there's a lot more onus, not just on the legal manufacturers, but also on the notified bodies. There's a lot more onus on them too. And again, it came down to this as well. When the EU MDR came down, and people need to realize this, is notified bodies in the EU are not just medical device only. They could be building merchants. They could be many different things. Some companies, they say, you know what, this medical device stuff is too much for us. We're walking away. So what's happened is caused a bottleneck. And then some companies, as a business decision, have turned around and said, you know what, we don't want anything to do with this medical device stuff anymore. It's too much for us. And that's caused more of an issue. That's what's happened with the EU MDR. It's caused a lot of shake-up in the community. And I feel as though, and again, at the same time, Michelle, feel free to disagree with me, it's stuff that medical device manufacturers should have been doing from day one. They didn't need a regulation to tell them to do this. It's best practice. And now we're shaking them up.
Yeah, it's the whole phrase, like, I gave you enough rope and all you did was hang yourself with it. And so that's how regulations evolve, not just in the case of EU MDR, but also at FDA. You know, the more freedom somebody had for interpretation to maybe make something that made sense for them, they made bad decisions or were not accountable or, you know, caused patient harm. And so then the regulators have to step in because the patients have to be in the best interest of the regulators. And so that's how regulations kind of evolve and how and get more and more complicated, is because the regulators have to get involved when industry is not accountable to themselves to following the quality management system. But I want to quickly loop back on that language discussion that we were just having with Karandeep. I know somebody based in Europe that speaks 4 different languages fluently, and they're in our regulatory space, and they help people navigate queries with that they get back from notified bodies under MDR. And he can tell, because the queries will come back written in English, but the way they're written, he can tell what language is their native first language. So like different sentence structures, different tones of voice. He could say, oh, that one's came from somebody that's in Germany, speaks German as their first language. And oh, that one's French. So there's all this. Not only do we have all the constraints of the interpretations, but then you add into that theory of constraints these nuances of the native languages, and us reading the findings in English is not necessarily what they meant to say in their brain as they were thinking in their native language. And then also to Karandeep's point about you have to make a business decision here. Well, in Europe, that is particularly complex because you need a very detailed market analysis for basically every country in Europe because they have different reimbursement structures. You know, Europe is on largely a tender system. And so tenders might only come up every 3 years. So it's just, especially for, I feel like, commodity products are really going to suffer here, because it's not like you can raise the rate, raise your price for a silicone catheter that's just, been on the market for 40, 50 years, no new technology, no need for new technology. But now you have to take this thing and prove, almost starting from scratch, that it's safe and effective.
There was a comment in the chat. I don't remember who said it. Apologies. Might have been Moshi. I'm not sure how to say your name, so apologies for that. But that he feels like EU MDR was geared more for class 3 devices, and then they made some tendency or leniencies for class 2A, B. I wonder if you have an opinion on that. Michelle, do you want to start?
Well, I definitely agree that all the submissions are a little bit more on an even playing field. And I feel like the rigor and the expectation that somebody's giving to, say, a 2B is now class 1 devices of certain functions are being scrutinized with a similar level of detail. So I do agree with that.
One of the so those of you listening to, I mean, we're going to discuss some of this, but I also want to get to some takeaways as well, something we can actually apply besides just kind of the discussion of the regulation. One of the things I'm curious about is we talk about notified bodies quite a bit. Do you have any recommendations or thoughts on how to go about choosing that notified body? And I'm going to look at the Q&A as well. So those of you who are listening, go ahead and check out the Q&A and be voting in there, and I'll try to start utilizing those questions. But yes, how to choose a notified body, or what are the recommendations that you've seen there?
So my view is this: first of all, is look at what your device is. Go into the NANDO database. Not every notified body can cater for every medical device, and the prime example is software as a medical device. So go into the NANDO database, find the code of which your medical device is, and see which notified body can cater for that. And generally, my opinion is contact all of them. It depends what your timelines are like. If you want to get on the market 12 months from now, okay, fine, you have a bit of leeway. But if you're a small startup and you've got an investor breathing down your neck, which is usually the case with investors, especially when it comes to investors who are new to medical devices. Medical devices take some time. If you've got somebody who's from maybe a different market, they just think, oh, we want to be on the market in 3 months. Yeah, good luck with that. Realistically, that's kind of how it works in medical devices. So go on and contact all the medical device companies that all the notified bodies that you can. And the issue with notified bodies, of course, is they require experts that understand that device. And again, the conversation that we were having earlier as well. One notified body may have 20 software as a medical device experts if you're a software as a medical device company. The other one maybe only have 5. So until you contact them, you don't know. Number 2, again, be realistic with your deadlines. Don't be like, oh, we want to be on the market in 6 months' time, but you haven't got your technical files in place, you haven't done your design controls, your quality management system is all over the place. So make sure that you've got it properly as well. So again, my view is contact all the notified bodies and see which one works for you in the timeline that you need, and make sure that your stuff is in order. That's my view. How do you pick a notified body? I'm not here to say that one is better than the other. It's just a case of which notified body can cater for you, for the type of device that you have, in the time that you need to get it on the market. I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. I think that's the wrong view.
Yeah, and I would just add to that flat out ask about their capacity. To Karandeep's point, specifically, how many people do they have that are qualified underneath the MD codes that your device it falls? Ask about that capacity. And then if you've got several options that have capacity, then maybe second is, what of those native languages are you most comfortable, kind of in engaging with? Because there are some where they are in countries where, they might have 2 native languages and one of them is English. So like things like that can help take some of the confusion and the interpretation issues out. And then just be mindful how long this process is going to take. you needed to start yesterday if you want to be on the market a year, even a year and a half from now. In some cases, 2 years, because you've got to have enough time to get somebody to call you back. I know people that are just like knocking on notified body doors and are just not even getting any acknowledgement because they're too small of a player. Then so you've got to start with the quote. That takes a long time to navigate with the notified body, assuming they've called you back. And then when you go from that proposal, you have to then go to a contract. I've seen several notified bodies present that just that whole kind of administrative paperwork activity can take up to 10 months to move through the notified body system. And that's before you even have any dates to get your audit or get your technical documentation reviewed.
That's a good point. And I want to kind of segue into some of the questions because this is kind of speaking to the notified body. I didn't intend to spend a lot of time here, but I think it's important. Rob asked, the general goal of the EU Commission was to strengthen the approval process. The changes increase workload by at least 2x. Unfortunately, there's no corresponding 2x in qualified reviewers. How long do you think it will take notified bodies to hire and train sufficient resources? And I may have a kind of a follow-on question from that as well, but do you have any estimate on how long it will take for notified bodies to increase their workload in the interim?
I actually talked to somebody at one of the notified bodies a few months ago, and he said that it takes 12 to 18 months depending on what their specialty is, to get that to turn around a technical file that gives a CE mark. So now we've gone from all that timing I told you about that can take 10 months for that administrative process. And then once you finally make it into, okay, we're going to actually review this documentation now to get the CE mark, that takes another 12 to 18 months. So it's taken all the way around. You know, that's another resource constraint on the capacity for the notified body and then they're all fighting over the same qualified resources in terms of staffing. So even if they technically have capacity, there's no consistency or availability for those internal specialists that are qualified.
So question then, I've been watching the chat a little bit, and the idea of switching notified bodies, the switching costs are pretty high. What if you get a response from the notified body that you disagree with? Because just to go back to earlier in the conversation, we talked about 48 different notified bodies means potentially 48 different ways of interpreting the regulations. What about the appeal process? And what are your recommendations about disagreeing with your notified body? Any tips or thoughts there?
My view on this is if you have a regulatory expert like me or Michelle, and we are hell-bent on we disagree with something like that, then by all means challenge your notified body. Now, again, if you just disagree with something, do not challenge the notified body. But if you have a strong case and you've got evidence for it and you can go back, because the issue is auditors are humans. Humans are opinionated. It's not black or white. It's not a yes or no. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to these regulations. By all means, challenge them. And again, with the auditor, it may not even be the auditor's fault. Maybe they've misinterpreted something, and a lot of companies don't realize this. This is the first time they've seen your technical file. This is the first time they've understood your product. So it's quite easy for them to misunderstand something, like anyone, right? The first time you come across something, you might misunderstand things about it. You know, if you've got a company who's been working with that same product for X amount of years, they understand it inside out. So it's not necessarily that the auditor has done something wrong. They may have misunderstood something about it or may not have been able to find something about it. And then what I always say to companies is this, again, you are required to have a GSPR checklist when it comes to EU MDR, but also have an EU MDR checklist. It's not a requirement, but tell the auditor every single clause of EU MDR, which specific document to look into, and which specific page number and where they can find that information. Because this is the first time they're looking at it. A lot of people don't realize auditors only have X amount of time to look into your technical files. They're not there for hundreds of hours. make their life easier. If you make the auditor's life easier, it will make your life easier. So just tell them where to look and where they need to go. And especially when it comes to EU MDR, you only have 3 rounds. Do you really want to lose a round just because the auditor couldn't find what they're looking for? So have a checklist for them, and please make sure that you tell them whatever they're looking for is very clear. It's on this particular document. It's on this particular page number. It will save you a lot of hassle. Now, my rule is this: if you make the auditor's life easier, it will make your life easier. You know, the auditors are not the police. They're not there to pick faults. All they care about is that you are compliant, you are following the rules, and if you can document that and you can show that to them, they will happily give you the CE mark. You know, don't try and hide things from them.
And back to the idea of challenging the notified body, there are internal escalation processes where you can file a complaint with the notified body, and they have to have their own internal processes to address your complaint. So at least where you can keep those discussions internal between you and the notified body, you know, push on the things that are worth it. Like, don't be petty. If it's really no skin off your back, just do it, go with it, and pick your battles where you want to dig your heels in. You can there's even a process if you cannot get it resolved within the notified body to appeal it to the competent authority for a final decision. I've had some clients though that were afraid to take that approach because they felt like that it would cause some sort of dissension and make their future relationship with their notified body difficult. So, and I've also seen notified bodies where people just gave in to the auditor because they felt like it was going to be the easiest and fastest way to get the clearance. An example of that is somebody had been working with this one notified body across 10 different technical files, all for very similar products. They had the clinical reviewer, the same clinical reviewer for all 10 technical files, and they used the same clinical evidence approach that she had approved or validated 9 other times. And then all of a sudden we get to number 10 and she changes her mind about what type of data that she wants to see in terms of market surveillance. And she asked for like a very detailed sales analysis of the competitors. Competitor sales data is not readily available, but this was a fairly large company that had, deep enough pockets. They went and paid, a very expensive firm to do this research so that they could turn it in with the clinical evidence about the product. So they had to go gather data that wasn't even about their own product and that is not publicly available. And they just did it because it was important to get it cleared, and that was going to be faster than an appeals process. You're on mute still.
I'm still working on learning how the Mac covers everything up when I have everything expanded as big as it can. So thank you for dealing with my technical challenges. I want to really shout out to those listening, because the chat has been really active. I've been learning a lot reading the chat and trying to both listen with my ears and listen with my eyes at the same time. So that's my own personal problem I got to work on. But let's see here. I want to go to the chat, or go to the questions, and ask Anne asked a question. She says, and if this is too specific, maybe we can punt, but maybe we can figure out a way to make this broad and apply to everybody. I did not find any guidance documents for significant changes. Can I use MDCG 2023 Rev 1 guidance on significant changes regarding the transitional provision under Article 120 of the MDR with regard to devices covered by certificates according to MDD or AIMD, guidance for manufacturers and notified bodies and reporting of design changes and changes to the quality system? Any thoughts or advice here?
My view here is, if something is affecting your intended use and claims, it's a significant change. For example, if you're just changing something like maybe the color of your device, or maybe, if it's a software medical device, maybe you're just changing the way that customers interact with it, that's fine. But if you're affecting anything that can bring in significant changes on risk, the way that the algorithm works, the way that the device interprets information, you are significant. That's the way that you need to interpret it. And I feel as though most companies out there need to have some sort of SOP in place, and especially software medical device companies. And again, it's kind of like software developers do not like quality and regulatory people. That's hands down. They do not like us.
They do not like
because
paper.
They have to document everything. They do not lack anything. These guys just want to get, we made a change in the software, boom, version 1 to version 2, that's straight on the market. Quality and regulatory doesn't allow for that. You need to have procedures in place where people sit down around on a table with us remotely, with us physically in the office, depending on how you guys work, where you sit down and say, okay, what impact is this going to make? Is this introducing new risk? Is it even reducing risk? Great. If it reduces risk, why not bring that up? You need to have meetings in place where kind of, what are the impact, what are the changes? Is it going to create false positives? Is it going to create false negatives? Is it going to reduce risk? Is it going to increase risk? And you need to have that there. And then as a company, you need to decide, is this significant or not? So my view is this: if you are changing anything about claims, or you may be introducing something that can give false positives, false negatives, maybe give a misinterpretation, that's significant. But if it's something simple as, you're just changing the color of the product, or you're just changing the way that people interact with it, or maybe you're just changing, some of the UX, the customer requirements, that's fine. So that's the rule basically, is, make a rational decision. Is this going to potentially give someone misinterpreting information for good or for better? Then that's significant. You don't need a guidance document for that.
Well, so the not allowing significant changes, Randy actually has maybe we could ask this question at the same time. Not allowing significant changes for legacy devices under MDD as they await MDR approval has caused a lot of backlog of change notifications for the notified body. Curious if you've been experiencing this as well with legacy devices. How have you seen this being handled? You kind of touched on it a little bit, but thoughts?
Yeah, so my view here, Etienne Michel, is kind of like, if you want to make changes, you have to go through the regulatory approval process. And again, I look, my heart is there for startup companies. If you're a startup in the medical devices space, MDR is a right pain. It's very difficult. But if you're a company that's been there for years and years, the MDR was there from 2017. And 7 years onwards, if you haven't got your stuff in order, that's on you. There were so many warnings, there were so many things. Then obviously due to COVID, the EU MDR extended, and there was the EU MDR extension up to 2027 or 2028, depending on your classifications. So for existing companies, I have no sympathy for you. My sympathy is only for people who are new to medical devices and maybe don't realize how regulated this space is. Yes, my heart is there with you guys. But if you're an existing company and you haven't got your stuff in order, you've been given so many lifelines. That's on you guys. Controversial, but that's my view.
Did you have a follow-up, Michelle?
This just popped in my head, but one of the notified body auditors that I used to work with said that regulatory and quality people are like prophets in the wilderness. And that's what it has felt like since 2017. And we just keep seeing these timelines pushed and pushed, and then, those of you who follow us on LinkedIn, I even had a countdown T- whatever days to the MDR apocalypse. And then I had to keep resetting that clock. And it's kind of like, I think that the number of times that they have punted that ball down the field has actually, I don't want to say hurt regulatory and quality, but it's kind of like made us look dramatic, like we were being dramatic, and it's never going to really happen, or it's not going to be as bad as we said. So I think that's an interesting dynamic too, is the culture that they've created around MDR with these extensions and everybody just holding their breath to wait and see what's really going to happen.
So it's a good point you make, and I have a question maybe for myself, and I need to go back to the Q&A, so apologies. Those of you who we don't get to your questions, I do apologize. I will send those on to Karandeep and Michelle, and if they're able to do something with them, then that's kind of up to them. I'm not going to speak for them, but I will send those on so they have that option to answer.
I'll be happy to answer anything so put everything in the chat. Me or Karandeep will answer as appropriate.
Yeah, the Q&A is what gets sent to them and what we will try to answer, but the chat is just, just feel free to talk amongst yourselves, and it's been great up till now. So I respect the elected officials that put these things in place, and I find myself poking fun at FDA or EU MDR sometimes, and I try to keep that to a certain respect. I know the job they have is a difficult one, especially making a regulation that is vague enough that applies to everybody, but specific enough to make safe and effective devices. But all that said, I'm curious, has this regulation that's been put in place, has it actually increased the safety and effectiveness of any one device? And do you have any example of it?
No, it did not. It's just adding more paperwork does not prove that your device is more safe and effective. That comes from designing it right in the first place. And then if you look at, back to one of my points I first made is the regulations come out of patient harm. Well, in MDR was being, developed was kind of all around the same time that PIP breast implant scandal. Well, that's a problem with like integrity, and you can't legislate integrity or character or proper decision making. So that, in that case, they had falsified some test results around the safety and efficacy of this new material that wasn't even a medical grade material for implants. And then it turned out it wasn't as strong or robust as the material they had been using, but they had falsified all their testing documents. Well, just requiring more documentation, if you're already operating underneath the character that you're going to falsify and create fraudulent documents and the answer to that is that we're going to add even more paperwork requirements. That doesn't solve your problem in my opinion.
Yeah. Karandeep, what are your thoughts?
I very much aligned with Michelle's controversial opinion here. It's all documentation based. It's not that the MDR says that you must go down to a facility and inspect them all. It's not that you physically have to be there and look at what they're doing. It's just more documentation requirements. And sadly, as Michelle says, documents can be falsified. That doesn't necessarily mean that devices are safer. These things can be falsified. By all means, you can create a document to say, yes, we had a management review. Yes, we did an internal audit. You can completely make it up. No one's there to inspect you. How do we know the company's done an internal audit? How do we know they had a management review? We don't do it. We're just relying on the documentation. And especially when you have your technical file submission under EU MDR, the auditors not necessarily come to your premises. You're getting your technical file, you're submitting it online. They're reviewing it online too, and they're coming back to you. All of that stuff can be falsified. And I'm not here to say anything, let's face it, especially when it came under the Class 1 MDD, there was a lot of companies out there claiming that they were fully compliant. But were they? In my opinion, not. Michelle, feel free to disagree on that one.
No, I think we're on the same page there.
Okay, I think I push people in the wrong direction when I push them to the Q&A because I'm seeing a lot of statements, and which I appreciate, but I'm trying to scroll down to get to the question. So let me ask this one. Are other manufacturers seeing 12 to 18-month timelines when submitting a substantial change with their notified body? We're getting quotations around 35K euro for a substantial change. Is that what other manufacturers are seeing?
I think it's dependent on the classification of your device. That's a big impact on how much it's going to cost. It also depends on the type of change that you're making. If it's a minor change, it's going to be less. If it's a major change, maybe they need to inspect your manufacturing facilities in terms of how you go about things. In terms of timelines, the notified bodies are getting quite quick right now at the moment. They're getting the in-house expertise. So I think it's really dependent on, number one, the type of device that you are, and the number two, how significant the changes are that you make. In terms of cost, it comes down to those two factors. It might cost you 35 for one company, it may cost you 12 for the other. So it's all dependent on your product and the significance of your changes and maybe what they need to inspect effectively. That's what it comes down to. And also your notified body too. If you have a notified body, so for example, let's just say you're a pacemaker company. You might contact one notified body who's got 100 experts in pacemakers, but the notified body that you're with, maybe he's only got 2 or 3 pacemaker experts. That may make a difference in the timelines. So again, it comes down to the amount of expertise within the notified body too. That's a factor you also have to consider.
Did you have a thought on that as well, Michelle? Or
No, I don't have
okay.
anything to add.
Sarah asked, it's not a question, but I thought it was worth going ahead and highlighting. So Sarah, thank you for putting this question in the Q&A. Before I left my this statement, before I left my previous company, we challenged our IVDR auditor and it was escalated to their management. We were able to provide the data and information to get the finding downgraded. I think it's good to share those stories because maybe it does give us the courage to stand behind our product or stand behind the things that we know are in accordance with the regulations. So thank you for sharing that, Sarah. So it is, to Karandeep's point, it is possible to go through that appeal process and to be successful. So that was, I like seeing that.
And I was going to say, Sarah, well done. Thank you very much for challenging the auditors, because a lot of people think auditors are like the police. What they say is gospel. But you can challenge them. If you think you've done everything right and you've done everything by the book, please go and challenge them. A lot of people just think, oh, the auditor said this is what we have to follow. But auditors are human. They can make mistakes, right? So Sarah, well done.
One other, so I love that this, Thalia, if I'm saying your name correctly, apologies if not, he or she rephrased my question, and I really like this. Another way of asking the question being, has the EU MDR increased the safety of any one medical device? This person has flipped that, is how many devices have been taken off of the market because of MDR requirements, and is that due to safety data or cost constraints? Do you want to weigh in on this? Do you have any idea or opinion here?
Yep. Even big companies. I've heard one of the top, I call them the megalists, have taken 20% of their products. And these are people who can technically afford to do MDR because they've got fleets of regulatory people all over the world working for them, but took 20% of their products off because that market analysis did not support the cost to maintain that particular product portfolio. And then I have, my smaller customers and startups just don't even want to touch the EU market right now. So it's the cost constraints, because again, especially for, simple, less complex products that are more commoditized, but you still need them for procedures. A lot of those people can't afford the process of MDR and are going to have to remove their devices. And I would be interested to know if Karandeep has any insider information, since he is kind of in Europe. But what, May 26th of this year was supposed to be, you have a driver's license and your driver's license is expired May 26th, unless you had active application that had been accepted with a notified body and had transitioned your quality management system. But so that means anybody that is still marketing in Europe after May 26th should be underneath the rules of this 2027 and 2028 transition period. We don't have any data, at least none that I can see. I've even asked my notified body friends, and it was kind of all a bit nebulous in their responses. We have no idea how many of those devices are essentially on market with expired driver's license, and they have no intention of getting MDR, and they're just going to see how long that they can go before they're pushed out, or they just voluntarily withdraw. Karandeep, do you have any information on that or any hypothesis?
Yeah, from a business standpoint, you just, forget medical devices saving people's lives, etc. Just from a business standpoint, some companies are thinking, especially when the EU MDR came in, this medical device regulation is too much. It takes too long. It's too costly. There's a lot of paperwork involved, where they're just walking away and saying, you know what? And the sad thing about that, this is a really sad thing about EU MDR, it's going to cost people's lives. That's what it comes down to. That's the thing that kind of upsets me when the EU MDR came in. There were companies out there with life-changing devices that can help people. But when they see it's too much of a hassle and there's no business decision on it, or maybe it's not economically viable, those products are never going to hit the market, especially in the EU. And the sad part of that is, sadly, people are going to suffer as a result. So again, that is the downside of the EU MDR, is there's so many life-changing devices out there that can make an impact on the world. But due to the regulations, the cost involved, and the timelines, it's just not economically viable for companies to put them out there.
We are almost at time, and so I want to give each of you like 2 or 3 minutes just to say, what is your biggest piece of advice that you, because you work with a lot of different companies that are going through the EU MDR, maybe pulling to the US and so on. I know we have a lot of questions that we didn't get to. Apologies for that. I am curious if you want to put in the chat, those of you listening, would you like to have another one of these in the future on this topic or a different topic? Feel free to just put that in the chat. I'll look at that all later. So if you want to have one of these hot takes, this is not quite the same as the webinar that we typically do in the past. This is a new thing that I've just randomly tried to do, and I really appreciate Karandeep and Michelle's willingness to jump on and do this. So let me know if you'd like future conversations such as these, or what topics you'd like to see. Okay, one other thing I want to mention. I put in this ticker that leave a testimonial. If you are interested in leaving a testimonial, we'd love to hear. You can give us some feedback. We love the positive, but we also love the constructive, as long as you're nice about it. We will be giving you a follow-up. So the follow-up will include the recording as well as the slides. So in the slides shows how you can get a hold of Karandeep, shows how you can get a hold of Michelle. I know that's a lot. I should have told you all that at the beginning, but we will be sending that to you shortly. So keep an eye out in your email for that. Michelle, Karandeep, let's start with you, Karandeep. What big piece of advice do you have that you think every company really needs to hear about this?
The beauty of the EU MDR is completely free of charge, regardless of what language you speak. It's available in multiple different languages. Just sit down and read it. It's not going to cost you anything. You can do it in the evening. And if you're bored at night and you're struggling for sleep, by all means, go and read the EU MDR. I guarantee you'll be in bed within 5 minutes. I'm not trying to say it's that boring, but it comes down to that. But again, the number 2 thing is kind of regulations exist for a reason. We don't want to kill people. We want to make life-changing devices that can help you. Regulations are not a burden, but you should see them as something that is trying to help people. By all means, go and innovate, but innovate within the regulations. And the number 3, of course, is start with the regulations at the start. Unfortunately, a lot of SME companies, they go out there and they market their device saying, oh, yes, we can do X, Y, Z, and these are the changes we're going to make. If you can't get regulated, you're never going to hit the market, regardless what your marketing budget is like. You can spend millions and millions on your marketing budget. If you're never going to get regulated, your product will never hit the market. So get regulations there from the start. Get it there. And again, number 2 as well, again, build a quality culture in your company. You know what I mean? What I'm trying to say to people, again, if you see issues within the company, if you see problems, you should have this encouragement within the company saying, hey, I think there's a better way we can make this device. Or maybe I see X, Y, Z issue with this device. And again, complaints can come from anywhere as well. Somebody could just be in Starbucks having a coffee right now. Let's say you work in a big company out there. I'm not going to mention names of any companies. And somebody says, hey, I was using X, Y, Z product, and they overhear that conversation. Encourage that person to go back to their workplace and say, hey, I had XYZ person saying that they had this issue with the product. What's the complaints process? What's something that maybe we can do? And that's what it is. Just have that encouragement within the company and talk to people. And the final piece that I will give away is have clear communication. Have the marketing guys speak to the quality guys. Have the quality guys speak to the regulatory guys. Have the quality guys speak to the CEOs, etc. Because then, Michelle, you've probably seen this too, especially as consultants ourselves. We may be speaking to 1 or 2 quality and regulatory people. Well, where's the CEO? Where's the CTO? Where are the decision makers? It's like, it comes down to that effectively. So that's my thing, is have open communication in your company. And of course, as part of the onboarding training as well, have quality and regulatory as part of that. Of course, you speak about your salary. Of course, you speak about marketing. Of course, you speak about general ethics, etc. But have quality and regulatory in that piece. What does ISO 13485 mean? What does EU MDR mean? What does CFR 820 mean? Let the people, when they join your company, understand what these things are and what the regulations are and why we do them. And then that will encourage a quality culture within the company.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can speak a little to just those kind of startup and mid-size. I think the people that are going to be most successful under MDR are those who are have newer or novel technology where they're going to have to do a clinical study for even the FDA. So if you're already going to be doing a study, you're going to be in a better position to be successful under MDR. So that would be, one of my first advices for people who should try to apply for MDR. But, I think to Karandeep's point, the communication, marketing used to be, just kind of out there, and they're in their own bubble and out in the world, and they just the go-getters. And one time I had somebody from marketing when I was like, making the regulatory strategy. I'm like, okay, which countries do you want to market this in? And he said, globally. Well, that's pretty a stereotypical marketing response. But now your marketing is going to have to be a very strategic and purposeful approach. And your marketing has got to move in lockstep with your regulatory team and strategy. Make sure that you're doing that country by country market analysis before you say, yes, I want to go sell this in France. You need to make sure that it makes sense or will make financial sense country by country. And all of that is you need to inform your investors, because you're going to need a lot more time and a lot more money than you think, especially if it's the CEO that's putting together the deck for the investors. They're bad about telling investors what they want to hear, and then they get in trouble or get upside down later because it's cost 3 times as much and taken twice as long as they anticipated, and they're out of runway on their budget. So I think that those are those would be my key pieces of advice.
Very cool. I love both of your views and your takes. Karandeep's suggestion to challenge the notified bodies is really well taken. And upstream of that is knowing the regulations well enough that you can challenge it. And I think the same thing is with what Michelle was saying. If you're going to be able to communicate this to the rest of the organization, you need to know it well enough you can put it into words that they'll understand. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of my takeaways that I'm taking from this. If you have takeaways, feel free to put those in the chat, but we are essentially out of time. Leave us a testimonial, leave us some constructive feedback and or positive feedback. I love both of those. We will be sending you a follow-up email, and we will be submitting all of these questions to Karandeep and Michelle. So if they have time and are able to answer them, maybe they can do that. Thank you all for being here. We'll let you all get back to the rest of your day.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.
Thank you very much, Etienne. Always a pleasure.
Didn't mean to just leave you guys. Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Should be good. All right. Take care.